department wrote a grant for this year called The Influences of Classical Modern Dance on Contemporary Choreography. We were interested in looking at what our forefathers did that is now being seen again on TV, in popular dances, commercial dances. I heard students all the time saying, oh, that's so Mia Michaels, or oh, that's so this person. And a lot of times I would think to myself, not really, that's really kind of more Lamone, or this person, or that person. So I started to really realize that our students were lacking a connection to the people who really founded the ideas of contemporary work that we see today. Our first residency was with Janet Charleston, who teaches at the Cunningham Institute in New York. She actually was here for a week. She taught master classes in the style of Cunningham and then set a work on the students that you're going to see in a moment. It ended up being a 13-minute piece. She set the piece not with Cunningham technique, but with the ideas that Cunningham set forth for the dance world that kind of really helped change the ideas and thoughts of choreography for us, probably for all time. And one of those concepts is something that we call chants.
Merce Cunningham and John Cage met in the late 1930s at the Cornish School in Washington State, and they formed a relationship that would form the context of their work together that would last for the rest of their lives. In the 1950s, they both began investigating what they called chance operations, and this was related to the I Ching. A primary component of chants for Cage and Cunningham was separating music from dance. So there would often be a sound accompaniment to Merce Cunningham's choreography, but the choreography would not be an interpretation of the music or vice versa. It would be two freestanding pieces of art that would be happening simultaneously.
The chance aspect of the entire process allowed us to create movement from an objective point of view, which was really helpful in not recycling a lot of the same movement that we, as dancers and choreographers, tend to do.
Her choreography ended up being developed not by the Cunningham technique, but by the processes and the ideas behind from which Cunningham worked. So for an example of this, in Cunningham's last tour, he had set choreography, but every person in the audience had a different iPod. And so they could set it to whatever song they wanted. So they had a different experience. Every person in the audience ended up having a different experience, and that happened by chance.
Our choreographer, Janet Charleston, prompted us each to create 6 simple movements, and then we paired together in groups of 2 and combined our 6 movements into palettes of 12 movements. She then set up several parameters such as a specific stage space, facings, levels, speeds, and we rolled dice to determine which movements we would do from which palette, on which facing, in which stage space, at which speed. We rolled dice to determine all of these different parameters. The stage space was designed by one of the dancers. We all actually created our own idea of a way to divide up the stage into many spaces, and then we rolled dice to determine which dancer's idea would be used, and that idea was then used throughout the piece.
I would say the most challenging part of the experience was the fact that we would have a set movement of our own and we'd have to alter it with very specific dynamic and tempo changes, and also the fact that pretty much we were creating the material ourselves rather than just getting material like we normally would from a choreographer.
Janet also rolled dice to determine some of the parameters of the piece and would come each day with those determinations and would explain them to us. So for example, she would roll to determine how many dancers would be in the first section of the piece. And we would then follow the parameters that she set up and roll the dice to determine how that section would play out. So the first section of the piece is a quartet, and we rolled, the roll of the dice determined that 3 of us would be in unison and 1 dancer would not be in unison with us. So we then had to roll to determine how that 1 dancer would be different. She's doing movements from a different palette, at a different speed, on a different facing than the other 3 who are in unison. And as the process continued, as we began to build the piece, it became evident that there were more questions that were being raised by the process than we were originally aware of.
Like basically everything that we did, we had to ask the dice first. Like people in this section or not in this section, or what we were doing in the section, how we were doing it in the section, like where we were doing it on stage. Like we all had to roll for numbers.
Actually interesting because not only because it generated what is now a freestanding piece that is not necessarily related directly to all of these larger philosophical concepts, but it was also an interesting process because it became an investigation for us in terms of the creative process. We were able to investigate answers to questions that arose as they came up.
By the time you see this, we may finally know what the sound's going to be. We are a week and a half out from the show, and we still don't know what the sound is. And in talking with Janet, the latest discussion is that we are going to have 2 different sound scores, each to be chosen the night of the performance. So you will be experiencing the decision on the sound at the same time the dancers are experiencing the decision on sound. And this is just a typical construction of what happens with the idea of chant.